What's up, everybody? Thank you so much for joining me on another edition of the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. I'm Ryan Thomas. Thank you so much for joining me. In the snippet there, the thumbnail, whatever you want to call it, whatever the hell you call it, I don't even know, I put the Thomas Take Sports Podcast business card on that instead of the logo due to the fact that it has all my information on there. Rather than me saying every single time the show starts, which I always do and I will, that the Thomas Take Sports Podcast Twitter is at Thomas Takeover. The Thomas Take Sports Podcast Instagram is Thomas Take SP. And the Thomas Take Sports Podcast can be seen on YouTube, Spreaker.com, as well as Facebook on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast Facebook page. So, thank you so much for joining me once again. Let's dive right into the action. Finally, at last, Khabib Nurmagomedov will be fighting Conor McGregor barring injury. I'm going to say that every single time I talk about this fight until I see those two men stare each other down in the octagon. This fight is such a big fight. It's a momentous occasion on October 6th. I know I will have off that day. I know I will need to prepare for the pre-fight show and possibly the post-fight show. I'm going to make this as big as I possibly can. There is a small chance, decent chance, that I might attend the fight with a few friends of mine, to Brian Fole of the Apple Bottom Sports, as well as the participant in the Thomas Take Sports Podcast Fantasy Football League. There's a lot going on with the show. And before I get into Khabib versus Conor, I want to let you guys know that on August 26th, there is the Thomas Take Sports Podcast Fantasy Football Draft, which takes place at 1 o'clock. I will be live on the air drafting my team and also going over the other draft picks by the owners in the league, by the 9 other gentlemen that I'm going to stomp out in this league, as well as September 2nd, my fantasy league that I've commissioned for 10 years, the Lockport Fantasy Football League, back in my hometown of Lockport, New York. Few longtime buddies of mine, excuse me, will join me on the podcast as well after the draft to talk about their draft strategy and whatnot. So something out there for everybody. A little bit of MMA today, but something to look forward to in the future for those fantasy football fanatics out there like myself. Definitely feel free to tune in, and I can't wait to bring you guys two really good shows at the end of August and at the beginning of September. Right as we dive in to football season, which I am zeroing in on one team only. Those of you that know me know that is the Buffalo Bills, but I will give you a divisional preview of each and every division in the NFL the first week of September, sometime I believe the Wednesday. That's what we got prepared here. So a lot of big things coming, and Khabib Nurmagomedov and Conor McGregor is on October 6th, Saturday, UFC 229, signed, sealed, and delivered. And as the headline reads, this is the will of Khabib Nurmagomedov versus the skill of Conor McGregor. Will versus skill in this one. Not skill versus will. It would have been flip-flop, but Conor is entering the ring first in this one. Khabib Nurmagomedov will enter the ring, or enter the octagon, I should say, last, being that he is the reigning champion. Notice how I didn't say reigning, defending, undisputed. He's defending the title. Will he defend it in actuality? That remains to be seen. And I'm not going to dive into my prediction for the fight. That will be saved for another occasion. What I will do today on the Thomas Take right now is dive into the skill set of Khabib Nurmagomedov and dive into the skill set of Conor McGregor, or the will of Khabib and the skill of Conor, as the headline states. So for those of you that are not big MMA fans, for those of you that have really hopped on the gravy train the last few years, due to the rise of Conor McGregor, for those of you that don't know Khabib Nurmagomedov, this guy is undefeated in the sport of mixed martial arts, which is very hard to do. The only guy that can really claim that he is truly undisputed and undefeated is John Jones. Maybe not undisputed, but you get the point. John Jones has an unblemished record. The only blemish on that record was due to a terrible reffing mistake by Steve Mazzagatti in a fight that featured John Jones and Matt Hamill. John Jones was throwing the 12-6 elbows, landed on Matt Hamill. John Jones then gets disqualified and loses that fight on a disqualification loss. What really should have happened was when John Jones threw the 12-6 elbow the first time, he should have been warned. The action should have stopped. Should have been a pause in the action. John Jones and Matt Hamill should have went to the opposite sides of the cage. But instead, John Jones threw repetitive 12-6 elbows, and Steve Mazzagatti didn't stop the action, didn't give him a warning, but just disqualified him and threw a loss on his record, which remains the only recorded loss on his record, but it wasn't a true loss. He was smashing Matt Hamill. The reason why I offer that to you guys is because this puts in perspective as how great Khabib Nurmagomedov is. Now, there is a little bit of fugazi with Khabib Nurmagomedov. There have been some fights along the way that we've seen him show that he is human. He is a human being. He can get hurt. He can get stunned. He can take punishment. And I offer you that due to the fact that just because a guy is undefeated does not mean he can't be beat. Floyd Mayweather was never beaten, but there are moments in even his fights, that were, he was getting beat up. He got hit. Marcos Maidana, Oscar de la Hoya. There was the Mexican fighter back in the day. I can't even think of his name off the top of my head. Juan Castillo, I believe. But any fighter can be beat. And the real narrative into this fight is that this is the biggest fight in MMA history. People are saying, is this the biggest fight? Is it McGregor versus Nurmagomedov the biggest MMA fight ever? 100%. Dana White went out on a limb here a couple hours ago and predicted that the pay-per-view would break the record, shatter it at over 2 million. I will one-up that and say that this can easily get 2.5 million pay-per-view buys. The reason why I say that is for the obvious reasons. Conor McGregor is a massive star. He's crossed over to boxing. He had the second biggest fight of all time, sharing the bill with Floyd Mayweather, obviously. That in itself, point one. Point two, Khabib Nurmagomedov is a massive, massive star in Russia. He went to the World Cup. He enjoyed the World Cup, but he did not enjoy the company of Russian President Vladimir Putin. Conor McGregor did, which was a very interesting narrative heading into this fight, that politics can somewhat be thrown into this mix of the fight as well. But Khabib Nurmagomedov, his one goal entering each and every fight, and each and every fight he has won, is to run out into the octagon and smash whoever he is fighting. Whether that's over the 25 minutes or until that fighter gives up, that is the game plan of Khabib Nurmagomedov. If you want to talk about game plans and skill set, it's as painfully obvious as a giant pimple on someone's nose. Weird analogy, I know. That's what I offer on this podcast, but that is the analogy that I'm going to go with. Khabib Nurmagomedov's style is as predictable as the 2018 Cleveland Browns not making the playoffs. Khabib Nurmagomedov's game plan is as predictable as the ending of The Wizard of Oz. And obviously the joke in that is that everyone has seen The Wizard of Oz. If you haven't, then something is seriously wrong with you. At the end of the day, Khabib Nurmagomedov will run out in the octagon looking to destroy Conor McGregor, put him on his butt, and smash his face in until Conor is knocked out or until Conor taps out due to strikes. Maybe somewhere thrown in there he will try to throw out a submission. Maybe somewhere in there he will try to make Conor McGregor quit and, quote, tap out, as Conor has done on multiple occasions. For those of you that didn't know that one. Most obvious is Nate Diaz. Most unknown is Joe Duffy. So Conor has done this multiple times. He's tapped to strikes or to a submission multiple times. And I throw that out there just to throw that out there. We're talking about the skill, or the will of Khabib versus the skill of Conor McGregor. And as Joe Rogan eloquated so poignantly during his podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience, that Conor has to catch Khabib coming in. Khabib has to fight Conor, stay close, try to get him down. As he tries to ragdoll him around, Conor can easily catch him with one of those left hands. As we saw in Khabib Nurmagomedov's fight with Ally Quinta, he can get tagged. He can get hit. He holds his hands very low. And that's something to keep an eye out on. It's also something to keep an eye out on. 3 years ago, Conor McGregor fought Chad Mendes. He won the UFC interim featherweight title. It was the first title that he officially won. If you want to call an interim an official title, the UFC churns those interim titles out like nobody's business. I don't get it for the life of me, but that's what they do. Conor wins that title. And throughout that fight, early on, a guy that was on a short camp was taking him down at will, was smashing his face. And that was Chad Mendes doing the damage. Initially in that fight, Conor had some trouble. There was a big cut around his eye. When the fight was over, he jumps the octagon in jubilation and joy. And you see that massive cut on his head. That was from the elbows, from the punches of Chad Mendes. That was 3 years ago. The question is, how much has Conor McGregor's wrestling defense improved, his takedown defense? How much has Conor improved off his back, fighting off his back? And how will he combat that if he does get taken down? The answer to that is I honestly don't know. Because when we look at Conor McGregor the last 2 years, he's fought one MMA fight versus Eddie Alvarez in which Eddie did try to take Conor down. He had him against the cage. He just couldn't do it. He has fought one boxing fight versus Floyd Mayweather. And he does train every single day. So I'm assuming that his wrestling defense, his jiu-jitsu has gotten better. His grappling has gotten better. But is it enough versus Khabib? That's one of the questions we ask ourselves heading into this fight. Is Khabib's stand-up going to be better from February till August? It better be. Because if it's not, he's going to get caught. And the fight could end fairly quickly. Regardless, the narrative of this fight is one that I have always enjoyed. The striker taking on the wrestler taking on the striker, however which way you want to look at it. It's a classic matchup in mixed martial arts history. One that harkens back to Chuck Liddell versus Randy Couture, Anderson Silva versus Chael Sonnen. I could go on and on. I mean, there's been so many. George St. Pierre versus Matt Hughes at the time. George was seen more of a striker, believe it or not. Matt Hughes was known as the dominant wrestler. There's been so many. I couldn't even. I mean, Daniel Cormier, John Jones. That'd be another one. I'm trying to think of another one. There's so many. It's ridiculous. But nonetheless, there's so many because they're all so great. All those fights I just mentioned are great fights. They're entertaining fights. And they produce great interaction. And that's what this fight is going to bring. Can Khabib get Conor to the ground? And can Conor catch Khabib? The longer this fight goes, the worse it's going to get for Conor. The first, second round, Khabib has a lot of work to do. And knowing that the fight starts outstanding each and every single round, I believe is an advantage, obviously, towards McGregor. Khabib actually has to implement his will to get it in his world. Conor doesn't. Conor can start the fight on the feet and keep it there if Khabib can't take him down. If Conor can keep the fight on the feet, I think this is a short order fight as I preview this fight, not predict it. Predicting it is different, which I will do sometime in October, days before the fight, or maybe the day of the fight before the fight takes place. I'm Ryan Thomas. Thanks for tuning in to the Thomas Take Sports Podcast.